Ella reached the altar in a torn purple gown, and the king laughed first. His favorite lifted her red skirts so the court could see Ella's bloody shoes. Then Carlos ordered her to kneel, though everyone knew she was his fated mate. For 3 heartbeats, no bell rang, no priest moved. Even the wolves chained beside the moon basin went still, their yellow eyes fixed on the girl in the ruined silk. Ella stood on the 9th white step with blood sliding down both heels. The satin shoes hid most of it, but a thin red line had already reached the stone. It curved behind her like a signature. Carlos looked splendid in black velvet and gold thread. The crown of Valemont sat low on his silver hair, and the spring sun made him appear carved from bright metal. Beside him, Isabella Walker wore a crimson dress and a small gold circlet meant for a promised queen. She pressed 2 fingers to her mouth as if shocked. Her eyes were dry. "Who told you to wear purple?" Carlos asked. The question carried across the square. Nobles leaned forward under their canopies. Guildmasters shifted on the lower benches. Servants lined the back wall with trays in their hands, trapped between work and witness. Ella tried to answer, but pain had locked her jaw. The right shoe bit deeper when she steadied herself. "Isabella gave it to me," she said at last. Isabella gasped softly. It was a perfect sound, small enough to seem frightened and clear enough for every noble ear. "Your Majesty, I gave her that gown for the future. I told her to keep it safe until she earned the color. I never imagined she would climb the altar in it before the bond." The lie settled over the square like smoke. Ella felt every face change. Curiosity became judgment. Judgment became amusement. A young baron hid a smile behind his glove. One old priest looked at the moon basin, not at her. Carlos saw the court watching him, and pride chose faster than blood. "You came here dressed as Luna before I named you Luna," he said. "You dragged a servant's hunger onto my altar." Ella reached for the edge of the gown. "No. She said the border rite required moonlight. Then she said I must not try it on. She said altering it would break the blessing." "Listen to her," Isabella whispered. "She even twists sacred rites now." The mate mark at Ella's neck burned. It had burned since dawn, but now the pain sharpened into warning. Her wolf pressed against her ribs. "Run," it urged. "Bite. Beg. Anything but this." Ella did none of those things. She watched Carlos step closer. His hand closed on her shoulder. The grip was hard enough to bruise through silk. For one foolish instant she thought he meant to steady her. Then he tore downward. The purple satin split with a sound the whole court heard. Silver lilies ripped across the breast. One sleeve fell loose. The outer gown slid from Ella's body and landed in a bright, wounded heap at her feet. Under it she wore only a thin white shift, plain linen from the servant stores. Wind crossed the altar. It pressed the linen against her knees and collarbones. A laugh broke somewhere on the noble benches. Another followed. The sound spread, uneven and ugly, until Carlos lifted one hand for quiet. "You are not Luna," he said. Then, "You are not Queen. You are a border omega who forgot her place." Ella bent slowly. Her heels screamed when her weight shifted. She gathered the torn purple silk in both hands. Dust clung to the silver lilies. The fabric had been her whole future 2 nights earlier. Now it was evidence, though she did not yet know how badly she would need it. "Go," Carlos said. She walked down the 9 steps without touching the rail. The first step opened the right heel. The second tore the left. By the 5th, her vision had narrowed to white stone and red sparks. By the 9th, the square had stopped laughing. People had begun to see the blood. At the back of the crowd stood a northern envoy in a black fur mantle. He had Carlos's silver hair, but none of his golden ease. His gray eyes followed Ella with such still fury that one guard stepped away from him. Ella did not know his name. Later, she would learn it had been Leon Frost. That morning, though, she knew only the weight of torn silk in her arms and the terrible fact that no prophecy protects a woman from a man who enjoys an audience. Months earlier, Ella had entered Valemont by the side gate because the main gate was being washed for a tournament. That was the reason the steward gave. She believed him because she was 18, tired from the road, and still willing to treat small humiliations as accidents. The royal carriage had collected her from Bracken Ford at dawn. Her village sat near the western marshes, where low stone cottages leaned against sheep pens and pine woods. Wolves guarded the borders there, not as monsters from old prayers, but as kin who carried human names. Ella's parents had died in a winter fever, so the pack elders raised her on duty, thrift, and stories about the wolf god's fairness. The mate mark appeared on her neck 3 nights after the harvest moon. It glowed gold beneath the skin, shaped like a crescent caught in thorn vines. The village healer cried when she saw it. The elders sent word to Valemont, and the royal answer came with seals, riders, and a promise that King Carlos had accepted the bond. "Serve him well until the ceremony," Elder Bram told her beside the carriage. "After the bite, you will be Luna of the realm." Ella hugged him hard. She had never owned a silk gown. She had never walked farther than the wool fair at Lark Crossing. Yet she climbed into the carriage because fate seemed too holy to distrust. Valemont Palace rose above the capital like a cliff of pale stone. Banners snapped from its towers. Copper roofs shone after rain. Ella stared until her neck hurt, imagining the chamber prepared for her, the ladies assigned to teach her court manners, and Carlos waiting with the solemn kindness of a man chosen by the moon. Instead, a house matron named Maud met her behind the kitchens. Maud had a narrow face and keys at her belt. She looked once at Ella's bundle, once at the faded wool dress, and did not bow. "You sleep in the servant wing for now," Maud said. "His Majesty wants you trained before any public step is taken." "Trained for Luna duties?" Ella asked. "Trained not to shame him." The room given to her had a hard bed, a coal bin, and one window no wider than her hand. Damp had swollen the doorframe. Someone had scratched names into the plaster, most of them crossed out. Ella placed her bundle on the bed and touched the mark at her neck. It warmed as if answering a distant fire. The first morning began before dawn. Maud put a wooden yoke across Ella's shoulders and sent her to fetch water from the lower well. The buckets bruised her hips before sunrise. At breakfast, she received black bread, old cheese, and the end of a servant's ale. A scullery girl with kind eyes warned her to eat fast before the boys took it. On the second day, Ella washed royal linens in stone tubs. The water came from the river, cold enough to numb her fingers. Soap burned the cracks in her skin. Above the laundry court, ladies crossed a bridge between the chapel and the music room. One pointed down. "Is that her? The faded one?" "Carlos must be praying the moon changes its mind." Ella kept scrubbing. She told herself great houses always tested strangers. Her village had tested apprentices by giving them the ugliest chores first. Perhaps queens began the same way. By the end of the first week, she had polished the black marble hall, swept ash from 50 hearths, carried wine crates, mended torn hunting cloaks, and learned which guards laughed when she limped. She asked 3 times to see Carlos. Each time, a steward checked a slate and said the king had no summons for her. The 4th request brought Maud's hand across her mouth. "Do you think a mark makes you equal to him?" Maud hissed. Blood touched Ella's tongue. The servants in the passage turned away. That was when she began to understand the palace had already chosen its lesson. It did not want her polished. It wanted her smaller. Carlos passed her once in the Red Gallery. He was surrounded by huntsmen, laughing at some story about a boar. Ella froze with an armful of folded towels. The mate mark flared so hot that tears sprang to her eyes. Carlos glanced at her, then at the men beside him. His smile thinned. "Keep the passage clear," he said. He walked on. The mark cooled slowly, like iron losing heat. Ella stood there until a guard shoved her shoulder and told her to move. That night she lay awake beside the coal bin and built excuses for him. Kings were watched. Then kings had enemies. Kings could not show tenderness before greedy nobles. If he seemed distant, perhaps he protected her from court jealousy. Hope can be clever when it is hungry. It can take crumbs and call them bread. Ella lived on those crumbs until Isabella Walker arrived. Isabella came to the palace on a clear morning with 6 trunks, 4 maids, and a laugh that made servants lower their eyes. She was Lord Walker's only daughter, a woman trained from childhood to turn beauty into currency. Her hair was dark red, her skin pale, and her mouth always seemed half amused by a secret someone else would suffer for learning. She found Ella in the herb garden, kneeling between beds of thyme. Ella had mud on both sleeves. The sun had burned the back of her neck where the mate mark hid beneath a loose braid. "So this is the border miracle," Isabella said. Ella rose too quickly and nearly dropped the weed basket. "My lady." Isabella circled her. Pearl-trimmed boots crushed the edge of a mint plant. "Carlos said the moon chose a humble girl. He was kinder than truth." The nearest gardeners bent lower over their work. Ella felt them listening. "I came to serve until the ceremony," Ella said. "Serve?" Isabella smiled. "That part suits you." She drew a lace handkerchief from her sleeve and let it fall into the mud. Then her voice sharpened enough to bring 2 guards from the path. "This girl snatched my handkerchief." Ella stared at the white cloth. "No, my lady, you dropped it." The guards looked at Isabella, not at the cloth. Isabella's eyes widened. Tears appeared with frightening speed. "She calls me a liar now." One guard seized Ella by the arm. The other lifted the handkerchief as if it were stolen treasure. Ella could have fought free. Her wolf wanted it. But an Omega who struck a palace guard would be chained, mark or no mark. She swallowed the growl. "Kneel and clean my boots," Isabella said. The garden went still. Bees moved through the thyme. Water dripped from a clay jar near the wall. Ella looked toward the upper windows, searching for Carlos and hating herself for it. No silver head appeared behind the glass. She knelt. Mud smeared across the handkerchief while she wiped boots that were already clean. Isabella held her skirts away from Ella's shoulder. "There," Isabella said, "you learn quickly." After that, cruelty gained a schedule. Ella still worked for the palace, but each evening she reported to Isabella's rooms. She carried hot water until steam blistered her palms. Then she knelt on rush mats and picked spilled pins from the weave. She combed Isabella's hair for an hour, then began again if one strand caught. Isabella never wasted effort. She chose punishments that could be explained as discipline. If Ella dropped a cup after 16 hours of work, Isabella called her careless. Then, if Ella moved slowly on swollen knees, Isabella called her lazy. If Ella stayed silent, Isabella called her sullen. The accusation changed. The verdict did not. Carlos knew. Ella learned that by accident during the 2nd month, she had been sent to return a silver tray to the king's antechamber. The inner door stood open. Isabella's voice floated through it, honey-sweet. "I was firm with her today," she said. "The little Omega spilled wax on my floor. I made her scrub it." Carlos answered from somewhere near the fire. "Did she cry?" "Not enough." He laughed. "Then try harder." The tray shook in Ella's hands. Wax had spilled because Isabella had tipped the candle with one finger. Ella still had burns across her wrist from cleaning it while hot. She backed away before anyone saw her. In the corridor, the mate mark twisted under her skin. It no longer felt like a holy crescent. It felt like a hook. The old cook, Mara, found her later beside the flour sacks. Mara was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and too useful for anyone to dismiss. She put a bowl of onion broth into Ella's hands. "Drink," Mara said. "He knows," Ella whispered. Mara did not ask who. Most men in power know more than they admit. Knowing lets them choose a cheaper conscience. Ella drank because her hands were shaking too badly to argue. Winter turned the courtyards white. Isabella's visits to Carlos became common enough that servants stopped pretending shock. Lord Walker received new tax offices. His sons gained army contracts. Carlos raised levies across the southern farms and blamed border raids. In the servant wing, men muttered over thin soup. In the council chamber, Walker men counted coins. Isabella's motive was no mystery. A fated mate threatened the crown she had trained her whole life to touch. Ella's blood was low, her village poor, and her manners plain. If Carlos honored the bond, Isabella would become a mistress at best and a memory at worst. So she made Ella ridiculous before the court could pity her. She made obedience look like greed. She made pain look deserved. Carlos had his own motive, uglier because it was weaker. He wanted the blessing of fate without the inconvenience of a poor Luna. He wanted Isabella's money, Walker's support, and the pleasure of believing himself desired by every woman near him. Ella's existence embarrassed him. He solved embarrassment by calling it insolence. The ceremony was announced at the end of the 3rd month. Ella heard the bells while drawing water. The bucket slipped from her hands and struck the well stones. A laundress laughed, but Ella barely heard. The bond would be sealed. Carlos would have to look at her before the moon basin. Once he bit the mark, the court would have to accept her. Hope returned with a rush so painful it felt like fever. 2 days later, Isabella sent for her. The purple gown lay on a cedar table in Isabella's private solar. Morning light poured over it, turning the satin deep as twilight. Silver lilies climbed the sleeves and opened across the bodice. The hem was heavy enough to move like water. Beside it waited crystal shoes, pale violet under the glass stones. Ella stopped in the doorway. No dress in Brackenford had ever looked like that. Wedding gowns there were wool in winter and linen in summer, embroidered by mothers, sisters, and neighbors. This gown looked as if moonlight had been woven by royal hands. Isabella stood beside the table with unusual solemnity. Purple belongs to Luna. You know that much, I hope. Yes. The border rite requires the gown to lie under moonlight before the ceremony. Isabella touched one sleeve. No fitting, no alteration, and no needle after the blessing begins. If you break the rite, you shame the bond. Ella knew a version of that custom. In Brackenford, brides left ribbons in moonlight for luck. Nobody treated the practice like law, but palace rites might be stricter. Sacred things often changed shape near crowns. "Why are you helping me?" Ella asked. Isabella's face softened. It was a dangerous softness, but Ella wanted too badly for it to be real. "Because Carlos is sentimental about fate," Isabella said. "If you must stand beside him, at least do not look like a kitchen rag." It was not kindness. Still, it was a gown. It was proof that someone expected her on the altar. Ella thanked her. The shoes worried her for 1 second. They looked narrow, and the heels were stiff. Isabella noticed the glance. "Do not try them on," she said. "Shoes carry the bride's first path. If you wear them before the rite, you invite wandering." The explanation sounded strange, but shame made Ella cautious. She would rather endure a tight shoe than risk being accused of ruining another sacred custom. She carried the gown back to her room as if carrying a sleeping child. Every servant in the corridor looked. Some smirked. Mara saw the dress from the kitchen door and frowned. "Where did that come from?" "Lady Isabella." Mara's frown deepened. "Then look for the hook." Ella wanted to listen. She did. But the gown lay across her arms, warm from sunlight, and the silver lilies seemed too beautiful to belong to a trap. She had lived for 3 months on rot and insult. Her heart reached for one clean thing. That night she placed the gown on the windowsill. Moonlight entered through the narrow glass and spilled across the satin. Ella sat on the floor beneath it. She did not sleep. Whenever her eyes closed, she woke and touched the sleeve with one finger to be sure it remained. The fabric was too long at the cuff. She noticed that when it slipped over the sill. She thought about trying it on for one breath, then pulled her hand back. No fitting, no alteration, and no needle. The shoes stood beside the gown with their crystal toes pointed east. Their beauty was colder than the satin. Ella imagined walking in them across the square while the court finally bowed. She imagined Carlos taking her hand, not because he loved her yet, but because fate and law required respect. Sometimes respect could become love. Elder Bram had said many bonds began as duty. Down the corridor, Isabella's maid paused outside the door. Ella heard the boards creak. She pretended not to know she was being checked. The second night, clouds passed over the moon and uncovered it again. Ella whispered her village prayers. She prayed for courage, for patience, for Carlos to remember the mark. Near dawn, exhaustion pulled her sideways. She woke with her cheek against the cold wall and the gown still shining above her. In another part of the palace, Isabella opened a locked box and removed the cobbler's receipt. The shoes were one size too small. Their inner heels had been roughened with crushed sandstone and sealed beneath a smooth-looking satin lip. The first steps would pinch. Longer walking would peel skin. By the time Ella reached the altar, blood would make every movement agony. The gown had its own poison. Then the shoulders were cut wide so it would sag. The sleeves would swallow her hands. The hem would drag unless she gathered it. A properly fitted Luna gown speaks dignity before the bride opens her mouth. Isabella had paid for this one to speak hunger, presumption, and foolishness. She did not need Carlos to know every stitch. She only needed him ready to believe the worst. On the morning of the ceremony, Ella washed in cold water and braided her pale hair with trembling fingers. The gown slid over her shift. At once she saw the problems. The left shoulder slipped. Then the sleeves covered her knuckles. The hem pooled on the floor. Her stomach tightened. Then the bells rang. No maid came to help. No carriage waited outside the servant wing. A page appeared only long enough to say the altar procession had already begun. Ella lifted the hem and stepped into the crystal shoes. Pain pinched her toes. "New shoes," she whispered. "Only new shoes." She opened the door and began the long walk alone. The path from the servant wing to the altar had never seemed far when Ella carried linens. That morning it stretched like a sentence. She crossed the herb garden first. Dew soaked the gown's dragging hem. The shoes squeezed her toes until they numbed. At the fountain court, feeling returned as pain, the inner heels rubbed with every step. A raw heat spread under both ankles. Ella slowed near the lion's spout, but a group of young nobles entered the arcade behind her. If she stopped, they would laugh before she reached the altar. She kept moving. The arcade stones were polished from centuries of processions. Queens had walked there in embroidered trains. War captains had crossed it under banners. Dead kings had been carried through on shields. Ella wondered if any of them had felt the path chewing through their skin. By the third arch, the right heel opened. She knew from the wet warmth. By the sixth, the left followed. The satin lining stuck, slipped, and stuck again. Her hands tightened on the gown. She dared not lift it too high because the sleeves already made her look clumsy. Ahead, sunlight filled the altar square. The square had been dressed for triumph. White cloth hung from balconies. Wolf banners snapped above the noble tiers. The moon basin waited on its carved stand, filled with water from the northern spring. Priests in gray robes lined the steps. Every lord who had mocked her in whispers now sat close enough to smile openly. Then she saw Carlos and Isabella together. Isabella's red gown burned against the white altar. Her circlet flashed. Carlos leaned toward her as she spoke, and his mouth curved in private amusement. They looked like the center of the ceremony. Ella looked like someone arriving late to beg entry. The next moments became a chain breaking link by link. Isabella raised her voice just enough. Purple was Luna's color. Ella had not been named. How sad that a servant girl had misunderstood. Carlos asked who had allowed it. Ella answered truthfully. Isabella wept. Carlos believed the tears because they protected what he already wanted. When he tore the gown, something more than silk parted. Ella had survived hunger, burns, slaps, and sleeplessness by imagining a future reason. She had told herself pain would be repaid with belonging. The sound of ripping satin killed that bargain. No future honor could cleanse a man who chose to shame his mate before a crowd. She left the altar with the gown in her arms. Behind her, one noble muttered that Carlos had gone too far. Another told him to be quiet. A servant boy saw the blood on the steps and crossed himself in the old northern way. Mara stood near the kitchen entrance with both hands pressed to her mouth. She could not reach Ella without causing a scene, and the scene already belonged to the king. Ella reached her room by following walls. Inside, the door closed. The little chamber smelled of coal dust, damp plaster, and moonlit satin gone sour from blood. She sat on the floor because the bed was too far. The shoes would not come off. Blood had dried between skin and lining. She pulled once and nearly fainted. Then she bit the edge of her sleeve, gripped the right shoe, and peeled it away inch by inch. Skin came with it. The sound was soft, almost delicate. That made it worse. The left shoe took longer. When it came free, Ella saw what Isabella had done. The heel lining looked smooth from outside. Inside, where pressure met flesh, tiny grains had been worked beneath the satin. They glittered red. Ella laughed once. It frightened her. She stopped by pressing the torn gown to her mouth. Every part had been planned. The command not to fit the gown, then the moonlight warning, the shoes, the route. Isabella had counted on Ella's reverence, Carlos's pride, and the court's appetite for spectacle. It was not madness, it was architecture. The mate mark convulsed. Ella doubled over. Rejection sickness struck through the bond like a hot blade. Carlos had not formally severed it, but public humiliation carried its own violence. Her wolf howled inside her, confused by a mate who smelled of threat. Fever rose so fast that sweat dampened her shift. Near midnight, the door opened. Isabella entered, still wearing red. The circlet sat crooked in her hair, and wine had stained one sleeve. She looked at the bloody shoes, then at Ella curled beside the bed. "You ruined them," she said. Ella lifted her head. The room tilted. "Why?" For once, Isabella did not pretend innocence. Wine and victory had made her careless. "Because you were in my way." The bond was not yours to steal. Everything can be stolen if the owner is weak enough. She kicked Ella's wounded leg. Pain flashed white. Ella did not cry out. Isabella seemed disappointed. "Leave before dawn," she said. "If Carlos sees you again, he may decide mercy was wasted." After she left, Ella wrapped her heels with torn linen. She folded the purple scraps as neatly as shaking hands allowed and tucked them into her bundle. At first light, she walked out through the same side gate that had swallowed her months before. No guard stopped her. That was the final insult. The palace had spent 3 months teaching her she was nothing, then proved it by letting her vanish without record. The northern road did not care who had been promised a crown. It cared about feet, weather, and bread. Ella had little of each. By noon, blood soaked through the first bandages. She tore strips from her shift and bound the wounds again beneath a stand of birch trees. Flies found her before sunset. She slept in a ditch that night with the torn gown under her head and fever crawling along her spine. On the second day, a shrine keeper refused her shelter after hearing she came from Valemont. Carlos's messengers had ridden ahead with a simpler story. The false Luna had tried to steal royal honor and fled discipline. Ella stood outside the shrine gate while rain slid down her face. She did not argue. A person with no proof in hand learns when words will only feed the lie. An old widow gave her shelter on the 4th night. The cottage had a peat fire and one cracked bowl. Ella ate barley soup with both hands around the dish. The widow saw the bandages and fetched boiled water. "Court work?" the woman asked. "Court cruelty." Same house, different door. The widow cleaned what she could and gave Ella willow bark for pain. In the morning, she packed half a loaf into Ella's bundle. Ella tried to refuse. The widow slapped the air between them. "Take it. Pride has no fat on it." The mate mark worsened near the border. Gold light flickered under Ella's skin, then dulled to the color of old brass. Sometimes she smelled Carlos, though he was days behind her. Sometimes she heard the square laughing when only crows called from the fields. Her wolf stumbled inside her dreams with blood on its paws. She kept moving because the alternative was Valemont. Snow appeared first in the ditches, then across whole fields. The north rose ahead in black pine ridges. Villages grew smaller and farther apart. People spoke less. Their houses had steep roofs and smoke holes shaped like wolf ears. Nobody bowed to royal gossip quickly there. They looked at Ella's wounds before they looked at her shame. At the border market, hunger finally brought her down. She had sold her last hairpin for bread 2 towns back. The market smelled of grilled onions, horse sweat, wet wool, and iron tools. Ella stood before a griddle cart until the woman cooking there sighed and handed her half a barley cake. "Eat before you fall into my fire." Ella tried to thank her. The first bite stuck in her throat. Hooves struck the road behind her. A troop of northern riders entered the market at a controlled pace, not charging, not strolling. Their cloaks were dark, their saddles plain, and their spears wrapped against snow. The man at the front reined in so sharply his horse tossed its head. He dismounted. Silver hair fell loose from beneath his hood. His face resembled Carlos enough to hurt, but the resemblance ended at the eyes. Carlos's gaze slid over people, measuring usefulness. This man's gray eyes stopped and stayed. "Are you Ella of Brackenford?" he asked. Fear closed her hand around the bread. "Who asks?" "Leon Frost, Lord of the Northern Marches." Carlos's younger brother, the envoy from the altar, the man whose anger she had felt without understanding it. Ella tried to stand. Her legs failed. Leon caught her before she hit the mud, then froze as if afraid the contact might frighten her. He released her the instant she found balance. "Your feet," he said. "Shoes," she answered. It was a foolish answer, but it was all she had. He looked at the blood stiffening the bandages. His jaw tightened once. "My healer is at Frost Hall." "I have no coin." "I did not ask for coin. I was rejected by your brother." "That is his shame." The market had gone quiet. Ella hated being watched, yet this silence felt different from Valemont's. Nobody laughed. Nobody waited for her to kneel. Leon removed his fur cloak and placed it around her shoulders. He did not clasp it at her throat. He gave her the edges so she could choose whether to hold them closed. "Come north," he said, "only until you can walk without bleeding, longer if you choose." Choice. The word entered her like warmth. Ella climbed onto his horse with help from the griddle woman and one of Leon's guards. The motion tore both heels open again. She gripped the saddle and made no sound. Leon mounted behind her, careful not to trap her body against his. As they left the market, snow thickened. It covered the road behind them in slow white strokes. For the first time since the altar, Carlos's scent faded enough for Ella to breathe without tasting grief. Frosthall was not beautiful in the way Valemont was beautiful. It had no copper roofs, no painted ceilings, no marble wolves posed for admiration. It stood on a ridge of black stone with timber walls, iron gates, and smoke rising from every chimney. Beauty there meant a roof that held under snow and a door that barred correctly. Leon carried Ella into the healer's room because walking from the gate would have torn the wounds wider. He asked before lifting her. That nearly broke her composure. The healer was named Mara, too, though she was younger than the palace cook and sharper in manner. She cut away the bandages, cursed under her breath, and ordered every man out except Leon. Then she looked at Ella. "Does he stay?" Ella glanced at Leon. He had already turned toward the door, giving her the answer before she spoke. "Outside," she said. He left. That was the first stitch of trust. The wounds were worse than Ella had allowed herself to know. Both heels had lost skin. One tendon lay close enough to danger that Mara's mouth went flat. Infection had begun along the left edge. Fever followed the cleaning, and with fever came dreams. In the dreams, Carlos tore the gown again and again. Isabella laughed with red wine on her teeth. The altar steps stretched into a mountain. Ella climbed them barefoot while nobles counted each bloody print. Sometimes she woke screaming. Sometimes she woke silent, which frightened Mara more. Leon never entered during those nights unless called. He sat outside the healer's room with reports on his knees and a sword across his lap. Ella saw him once through a cracked door, asleep upright, chin lowered to his chest. A candle had burned to wax beside him. He brought practical things: broth, clean wool stockings, a warmed stone wrapped in cloth, a knife small enough for her hand. "Why the knife?" Ella asked. "Because helplessness should not be part of healing." She kept it under her pillow. Weeks passed before she could stand. During that time, news traveled. Carlos had announced that Ella had fled after disgracing the altar. Isabella now presided at feasts. Lord Walker had taken control of military supply. Taxes rose again in the south to fund patrols that never reached the villages they were meant to protect. Leon read the reports without expression. Ella watched him from the cot. "You hate him," she said one evening. "I know him." "That is not the same." "With Carlos, it is close." Leon told her their father had admired boldness and mistaken vanity for strength. Carlos learned early that applause could cover failure. Leon learned that someone still had to repair what applause ignored. When their father died, Carlos took the crown and sent Leon north with too few men, hoping border winter would turn him into a useful legend or a quiet corpse. "Why help me then?" Ella asked. "I was his unwanted mate." Leon was shaving a strip from an arrow shaft. The blade paused. "He does not decide your worth by throwing it away." It was not a love speech. It was better. It left no debt inside her. Spring came late. Ella moved from the healer's room to a small chamber overlooking the pine yard. She sewed war coats first because her hands knew needles. The northern warriors thanked her by name. No one called her clumsy when a seam went crooked. They brought it back, showed the problem, and paid for the repair. Once her heels closed, she asked to learn the bow. The yardmaster laughed until Leon looked at him. Ella lifted her chin. "Let him laugh," she said, "then teach me." She missed the first target by a full cart length. Snow swallowed the arrow. 2 boys snickered. Ella walked into the drift, found the arrow, returned, and shot again. By dusk, her fingers shook too badly to draw. The next morning, she came back before breakfast. Discipline felt different without humiliation attached. Mistakes became information. Pain became warning, not entertainment. She learned to ride northern saddles, read hoofprints, count provisions, and sleep in armor. Her wolf strengthened under cold air. The gold mate mark began to fade during midsummer. At first, Ella thought sickness had damaged it. Mara examined the skin and called Leon in only after asking permission. "The old bond is dying," Mara said. "Another alpha's scent has been steady near you. Your wolf trusts it." Ella touched the mark. Beneath the fading gold, silver light had gathered like frost. Leon looked away first. "I can leave Frosthall for a while." "Do you want to?" "No." "Then do not offer noble misery as medicine." He almost smiled. Love did not arrive like the stories promised. It arrived while Leon waited outside doors. Then it arrived in the way he handed her reins and expected her to use them. It arrived when he argued with her strategy and counsel, then accepted her correction before his captains. It arrived because he never treated her wound as the most interesting thing about her. At the winter victory fire, after Ella helped defeat raiders near Pine Mere, Leon asked for the bond. He did it away from the songs, near the edge of firelight. Snow moved through his silver hair. His hands were empty. "I want to mark you," he said. "Not to replace what he broke, not to claim what survived without me. I want a life beside you, if you choose it." Ella thought of the altar. Then she thought of the knife under her pillow, the bow in her hand, the reports spread between them on long nights. Carlos had demanded belief. Leon offered choice. "Yes," she said. His bite hurt for one breath. Then warmth opened through the mark, steady and clean. The last gold thread burned away. Silver lines spread beneath Ella's skin, bright as northern dawn. Her wolf lifted its head and answered his. Around the fire, warriors felt the change and fell silent. Then someone began to beat a spear against a shield. The sound grew until the whole yard thundered. Ella did not become whole because a man loved her. She became whole because she had been allowed to own herself again. Love came after that, and therefore it could stay. While Ella healed in Frosthall, Valemont did not forget her as cleanly as Carlos hoped. The palace tried to sweep the story into servant gossip, but servants are the memory of any great house. They know who wakes before dawn, who drinks too much, who pays late, and who bleeds after a ceremony. Mara the cook kept the first record. She wrote on scraps torn from flour invoices because proper parchment was locked in the steward's office. One note named the morning Ella arrived. Another named the day Maud slapped her outside the pantry. A third described the burns on Ella's wrist after Isabella tipped the candle. Mara did not know whether anyone would ever read the notes. She wrote because silence had begun to taste like complicity. The scullery girl with kind eyes was named Ruth. She had watched Ella share half her bread with a stable boy during the second week, back when Ella herself was hungry. After the altar, Ruth found one red print on the lower passage stone. It had dried before the cleaners came. She touched it with 2 fingers, then pressed those fingers to a scrap of linen. The mark blurred, but it stayed. Ruth hid the linen inside a cracked jar behind the pickle barrels. Even the tailor suffered from what he had done. His name was Penn, and he had 2 daughters with winter cough. Walker's steward held his debt and made sure Penn understood the price of refusal. Penn cut the gown wrong with hands that would not stop sweating. When news spread that Carlos had torn it from Ella's body, Penn vomited behind his shop. Guilt did not make him brave that day. It made him careful. He kept the false measurements under a loose floorboard. The cobbler kept better proof. Isabella had ordered the shoes herself and laughed when he asked whether the size was correct. She told him the girl needed help learning grace. The cobbler, a narrow man named Seth, had worked too long for nobles to trust laughter. He pressed her seal into a wax tablet beside the order. Later, when Walker's men delayed payment, he saved the tablet out of spite. Spite, like mercy, can become useful when truth needs witnesses. Carlos sensed unease in the palace but named it disloyalty. That was easier. He promoted louder men and dismissed quieter ones. He let Isabella replace half the household staff with women loyal to Walker. The new maids wore better ribbons and carried sharper rumors. They called Ella the purple beggar and claimed she had stolen jewels before fleeing. The lie traveled badly outside the capital. Border villages knew the old rites better than Isabella did. When royal riders said Ella had twisted moon customs, elders asked which moon custom forbade fitting shoes. When riders said Carlos had shown restraint, mothers asked why restraint left blood on altar stone. The crown's story survived in drawing rooms. It weakened in kitchens, barns, and shrine yards. Lord Walker cared less about the story than the openings it gave him. With Isabella seated beside Carlos at feasts, Walker moved through offices like mold through damp walls. His eldest son took wagon contracts. His second son took bridge tolls. A cousin became judge of levy disputes, which meant no dispute ended against the family. Taxes rose, records vanished, and soldiers at the marches received boots with soles thin as paper. One winter night, a squad from the Southern Army reached Frost Hall with frostbite and no pay. Their captain expected prison. Instead, Ella sat with him in the map room while Mara cut dead skin from 2 of his men's toes. "Why come here?" Ella asked. The captain placed a folded wage roll on the table. "Because your proclamation after the Pinemere raid said deserters from unlawful orders could testify." "That proclamation was about raiders." "A starving soldier reads generously." Ella almost smiled. Then she saw the names. 46 men unpaid for 8 months, 3 dead, 7 missing. Supplies marked delivered in Walker ledgers had never left the capital. The captain had copied what he could before fleeing. Leon came in after midnight and found Ella still awake, surrounded by lists. She had ink on her fingers and fury held so tightly it had become calm. "This is larger than my humiliation," she said. "It always was," Leon answered. "No, I knew others were suffering. I did not understand the machinery." He sat across from her. "Then learn it. Machinery can be taken apart." That became her work through the second year. She learned how grain moved from tenant fields to royal stores. Then she learned which toll bridges mattered and which existed only on paper. She learned why a village might cheer soldiers one year and poison wells the next. Men who expected a wounded woman to speak only of betrayal found themselves questioned about mule numbers, salt prices, and winter fodder. Some were offended. Ella let them be offended. Offense fed no army. Ruth's linen scrap reached Frost Hall inside a jar of pickled onions. Mara the cook had found a trader willing to carry it. Penn's false measurements followed in a boot heel. Seth's wax tablet came wrapped in a prayer cloth. One by one, the palace's hidden witnesses crossed the distance Carlos believed protected him. Ella placed each proof in a cedar chest beside the torn gown. She never opened the chest when anger was fresh. She waited until she could breathe evenly. Then she read, sorted, copied, and sealed. Evidence deserved cleaner hands than rage. That discipline changed how the northern chiefs saw her. At first, some respected her because Leon did. Others respected her because she endured training without complaint. By the end of the second winter, they respected her because she could turn pain into a case strong enough to move armies. The council that chose war lasted 3 days. It began badly. Chief Rowan of the Stone Ridge Pack wanted a direct strike through the mountain road. He had lost nephews to unpaid royal patrols and saw no reason to spare any town that fed Carlos. Lady Marin of the Lake clans wanted to wait until autumn, when harvest resentment would be sharpest. The River Lord wanted guarantees on toll rights before committing boats. Every person in the room had a grievance. Not every grievance made a strategy. Ella listened through the first day without speaking. Leon did the same. Men argued themselves hoarse under antler chandeliers while sleet rattled against the shutters. Maps lay weighted with knives. Every knife pointed south. Near midnight, Rowan slammed his fist onto the table. The girl knows Carlos's cruelty. Let her say what blood demands. The room turned. Ella stood. Blood demands many things. Most of them are stupid. Silence fell hard. She walked to the map and moved Rowan's knife from the mountain road to the first grain town. If we attack here, Carlos names us invaders. The hungry towns close their gates because desperate people fear fire more than taxes. If we take the granaries without rules, Walker's men call us raiders, and they will be half right. Rowan's face darkened. You would spare those who watched you crawl from his altar? No town watched that. A court did. Servants watched because they were trapped. Nobles watched because they were entertained. We name the guilty clearly, or we become useful to Carlos. Lady Marin leaned forward. And what would you do with the guilty? Try them where their victims can hear the charges. Trials slow war. So does burning towns we need to feed us. Leon hid his mouth behind one hand. Ella saw the movement and nearly lost her temper at him too, until she noticed he was hiding a smile. By dawn, the council had stopped asking whether Ella was too wounded for command. They had begun asking whether their own plans could survive her questions. On the second day, she presented the witness chest. Not every scrap could become a charge. Some were rumor, some were grief without proof. Ella separated them in public. That mattered more than she expected. Chiefs used to blood feuds watched her set aside accusations against men she hated because the evidence was weak. You protect Carlos now? Rowan asked. I protect the verdict, Ella said. If we use lies against a liar, he still teaches us. The River Lord gave his boats after that. On the third day, Leon laid his sword on the table and swore to accept Ella as War Luna, equal in command over proclamations, supply justice, and civilian protection. The oath was not romantic. It was administrative, witnessed, and sealed. Ella loved him more for that than for any song sung by the fire. The army began forming before the snow melted. Smiths repaired spearheads. Women cut bandages from old linen. Herd boys learned message whistles. Quartermasters counted everything twice and argued over the third count. Ella spent mornings with scouts and evenings with clerks. Her dreams still carried the altar sometimes, but waking gave her work sharp enough to cut through memory. One morning, a captured Walker spy was brought to Frosthall. He had been found near the horse lines with a vial of bitter almond oil. Rowan wanted him hanged before breakfast. Ella ordered a hearing. The spy was 16. His name was Tom Vale, nephew of the old gate captain in Valemont. Walker's men had threatened his mother with debt prison unless he carried the vial north. He had not poured it. He had hidden behind the hay shed for an hour, crying too hard to move. A spy is a spy, Rowan said. A child under threat is also a witness, Ella answered. Tom told them about the North Gate captain, Oren, and the flogging scar Carlos had given him. He told them which gate crews were unpaid and which Walker officers drank through night watch. He drew the kitchen yard from memory. That drawing later saved 50 northern lives. After the hearing, Rowan found Ella in the practice yard. You make mercy difficult, he said. She loosed an arrow. It struck outside the center ring but inside the heart mark. Easy mercy is usually laziness. And difficult mercy? A blade with a handle. Rowan grunted. It was the closest he came to apology. 2 weeks later, he placed his Stone Ridge riders under her field orders without complaint. The night before the march, Ella opened the cedar chest alone. The purple scraps lay on top. Beneath them waited wage rolls, seal tablets, measurements, letters, and Ruth's faded linen. She did not cry over them. Tears would come later or not. What mattered then was that every piece had a place. Leon knocked once. "Come in," she said. He entered and stopped beside the open chest. "Do you need me to take it?" "No." "Do you need me to close it?" "No." "What do you need?" Ella folded the gown scraps and set them back. "Tomorrow, when we ride south, remind me that justice is not the same as making them feel what I felt." Leon nodded. "I will. And if I forget, then I will stand in your way." She looked at him. Another man might have promised obedience and called it devotion. Leon offered resistance if her soul required it. That was why she trusted him with the softest places in her. "Good," she said. "I would hate you for a week." "Only a week?" "Do not test mercy before a war." He laughed quietly, and the sound eased something in the room. Outside, the army slept in rows of canvas and banked fires. South of them, Carlos feasted under gold ceilings, believing fear would hold because it always had. By the third spring, the question was no longer whether Carlos deserved punishment. It was whether the realm could survive him. Letters reached Frosthall in flour sacks, saddle linings, prayer books, and once inside a hollow cheese. Southern barons complained of impossible taxes. Village elders wrote of grain taken twice, first by royal collectors and then by bandits wearing royal colors. Soldiers sent scraps of unpaid wage rolls. A priest from Lark Crossing copied burial names from 3 hamlets that had frozen after Walker men seized winter wood. Ella spread the letters across the council table. Anger rose in her, but it had changed shape. Personal revenge was a hot coal. This was a forge. "If we march for my wound alone, we fail," she told the chiefs. "If we march for theirs, gates will open." Leon backed her plan, though several captains expected him to claim command by blood. He took the main army because his name could hold old alliances. Ella took the proclamations, the quartermasters, and the advance scouts. She knew hunger would decide more towns than swords. The first proclamation named Carlos, Isabella Walker, Lord Walker, and the officials who had signed the worst levies. It promised trial, not slaughter. Then it promised no harm to common folk, no looting, and payment for supplies. It also promised tax relief to towns that opened peacefully. "Mercy on parchment is cheap," one chief said. Ella nodded. "Then we make it expensive to break." At the first town, a northern soldier stole a baker's strongbox. Ella convened a field court before sunset. The baker testified. 2 soldiers confirmed the theft. The thief was sentenced to hard labor and repayment from his pay share. The strongbox returned before the bread cooled. By morning, every market within 20 miles knew the Northern Army punished its own. The second town opened without a siege. Women brought water to the road. A miller handed Ella the gate key and asked whether the royal tax books would burn. Ella ordered the records copied first. Debts made by fraud were struck. True public stores were counted and guarded. Only then did the false levies go into the square fire. Carlos answered with threats. He ordered Southern captains to seize hostages from villages suspected of aiding the North. 3 captains refused. One sent Ella the order with Carlos's seal still wet. Another deserted with 40 men and a cart of moldy arrows, apologizing because the arrows were all the crown had issued. Isabella urged Carlos to hire mercenaries through her father. Lord Walker agreed, then demanded payment in land titles before the men arrived. The argument delayed them 10 days. During those 10 days, Ella crossed the river ford, cut the capital road, and took 3 granaries without burning a door. The campaign became a chain of consequences Carlos had forged himself. Unpaid soldiers left their posts. Overburdened towns gave maps to Ella's scouts. Servants in noble houses counted weapons and whispered numbers to peddlers. A stable girl caught one spy pouring poison into a horse trough because Ella's quartermaster had paid full price for hay the week before. Kindness returned as intelligence. Fairness returned as bread. Discipline returned as open gates. On the 23rd day, the northern banners appeared before Valemont. Carlos stood on the wall in polished armor. From below, Ella could see how badly it fit. He had gained softness from feasts and lost the patience to train. Beside him, Lord Walker shouted at captains who no longer met his eyes. The city behind them smelled of fear, smoke, and locked bakeries. Leon offered terms: abdication, arrest, public trial, and protection for the city. Carlos refused before the herald finished. That night, the old North Gate captain opened the gate. His name was Oren Vale. Carlos had flogged him 2 years earlier for asking when his men would be paid. Oren had kept the scar and the keys. At moonset, he lifted the bar. Northern scouts entered first, then Ella with the river companies. They took the gatehouse, the armory, and the kitchen yard before the palace bells understood the danger. There was fighting, but not much. Walker's private guards resisted near the treasury. Leon broke their line with shield men and gave the survivors one chance to drop weapons. Most took it. Royal guards outside Carlos's chamber surrendered when Ella read the proclamation aloud and promised wages owed from Walker's seized accounts. Carlos was found in a night robe, sword in hand, with no boots on. He looked from Leon to Ella as if one of them must be a dream. "You," he said. Ella wore fitted armor, dark leather under silver plates. Her heeled feet stood in soft northern boots. The silver mark at her neck glowed steady. "Yes," she said. "Me." He lifted the sword. His hand shook. Leon stepped forward, but Ella raised one finger. "Do not make your last royal act a foolish one," she told Carlos. "You have a trial waiting. Take it while you still have a voice." The sword lowered. Isabella was not in the palace. She had fled to the Walker estate, where she packed pearls into a flour sack and shouted for horses. Ella reached the estate after dawn with 12 riders and 3 warrants. The door to Isabella's chamber splintered inward. Rouge streaked Isabella's chin. Jewels lay across the bed. She saw Ella and made a sound too thin to be a scream. "You died," Isabella whispered. "No," Ella said. "You stopped watching." Isabella tried money first, then secrets, then tears. She named cousins, judges, taxmen, and lovers. Each offer bought another charge. Ella listened until Isabella ran out of breath. "Bind her," she said. Lord Walker was arrested in his counting room. 3 iron chests of ledgers stood behind him. He claimed they were private accounts until one clerk found soldier wage rolls under a false bottom. By noon, Walker's sons were in custody, his seals seized, and his mercenary contracts exposed as unpaid promises. Valemont had not fallen to a dagger in the dark. It had fallen because Carlos mistook fear for loyalty, Isabella mistook humiliation for victory, and Walker mistook theft for government. Their own choices opened the gate. The march south remade Ella's name before she reached the capital. Carlos had made her the purple beggar in court gossip. The road made her something else. At Milburn, she ordered the army to camp outside the walls instead of occupying homes. The mayor expected demands and brought his daughters to plead. Ella asked for the grain books. When he hesitated, she told him which Walker cousin had signed the false levy. His knees nearly failed. "We paid twice," he said. "Then you will not pay us a 3rd time." She bought oats, salt, and lamp oil at winter rates. The quartermaster complained until she made him calculate the cost of a closed town behind them. He paid. The next morning, Milburn's gates opened wider, and 3 boys volunteered as guides through the marsh road. At St. Orla's Ford, a priest refused entry to Northern Wolves. He had preached Carlos's version of the altar for 2 years. The crowd expected Ella to punish him. She asked whether his shrine records were honest. He said they were. She ordered them brought. The records named 18 children buried after winter wood seizures. The priest had written the causes in plain ink: fever, lung rot, exposure, hunger. His sermons had lied, but his burial hand had told the truth. "Why keep these?" Ella asked him. The old man shook. "Because God or Wolf, someone had to know." She removed him from judgment duty, but left him the shrine. Rowan objected. Ella pointed to the burial book. "A man may fail one courage and keep another. We punish the failure we can prove." At Hymir, Walker's men tried to force a battle inside a market street. They placed archers above a cooper's shop and chained the lower doors from outside. Ella noticed smoke leaking from the rear window before the assault began. She halted the line, sent shield women through the alley, and ordered the cooper's family pulled out through the roof. Only then did Leon advance. The fight lasted 7 minutes. The story lasted longer. By dusk, every shopkeeper in Hymir knew the Northern Army had delayed victory to save one trapped family. That night, Ella sat with a girl whose father had been taken for tax debt. The girl was 12, thin and furious. She asked whether queens could open prisons. Some prisons, Ella said, not all at once. Then why be queen? Ella had no easy answer. She looked at the girl's cracked hands and thought of her own hands in the laundry tubs. Because some doors stay locked until someone with a seal chooses the key over the whip. The girl considered this. Will you choose the key? When I can, when I cannot, I will tell you why. Children dislike court language. They hear the rot in it faster than nobles do. The girl nodded only after deciding the answer had enough bone. Near the capital, the army passed the field where Carlos held summer hunts. Ella remembered hearing those hunts from the servant wing, horns crying over the roofs while she scrubbed soot from copper pots. Now the hunting lodge stood empty. Its cellars held grain stamped for border relief. Walker had diverted it for noble feasts. Leon wanted to burn the lodge. Ella wanted it too. She could almost see flames taking the carved doors. Instead, she opened the cellars and sent the grain to 3 villages. "You are thinking of the altar," Leon said when they rode on. "I am thinking of matches." Same answer? Not today. He rode quietly beside her. That was another kind of help. The closer they came to Valemont, the more the road filled with people. Some came to stare. Then some came to offer food. Some brought accusations written on scraps of cloth because parchment cost too much. Ella could not read them all, so she created a moving court. 3 clerks rode in a wagon. A healer sat beside them to mark injuries. Guards kept order without pushing the old or hungry from the line. One woman brought a pair of child's shoes with holes in both soles. Her son had died after royal collectors took their winter goat for unpaid road tax on a road never built. She did not ask for money. She asked Ella to make Carlos look at the shoes. Ella took them. Later, they lay beside the purple gown during the trial. Carlos noticed them only once. That was enough. His face changed in a way no apology could improve. On the final night before the city, Ella walked the camp alone. Fires burned low. Spearheads caught moonlight. Somewhere men sang the Brackenford sheep song badly, having learned it from her village guides. She stopped beyond the last wagon and removed one boot. The grass was cold. Her heel held. For years, pain had told her where she stood. That night, absence told her more. The wound had healed. The memory remained. They were not the same thing. Mara found her there and said nothing for a while. "You should sleep," the healer said. "I know." "You will not." "No." Mara handed her a cup of bitter tea. "Then at least be awake usefully." Ella drank and grimaced. "This tastes like boiled saddle." "Good, you are still capable of complaint. I was worried command had ruined you." They watched the capital fires burn below the ridge. Ella thought of the servant wing, the altar, Carlos's hand in the silk, Isabella's red smile, and the many people who had suffered without ever seeing a purple gown. By dawn, she was ready enough. No one is ever fully ready to walk back into the place that broke them. Ready enough has to do. The trial began 3 days later in the Great Hall. Ella refused a secret execution. She refused a festival of revenge. The kingdom had watched her shame in public, so it would watch the truth in public too. The hall changed before the doors opened. Carlos's banners came down. Northern wolf flags rose beside the city guild colors, not above them. Benches were set for nobles, soldiers, servants, priests, and border chiefs. A scribe sat at each pillar. Every charge would be copied. Carlos entered first in a plain prison tunic. Without velvet, he looked younger and meaner. His silver hair hung unbound. He searched the room for sympathy and found mostly people who had paid for his comfort. Isabella came next, barefoot because the prison healer had cut away jeweled slippers that hid infected blisters from her attempted flight. She leaned on a guard and glared until she saw the cobbler seated near the witness rail. Then color left her face. Ella did not sit on the throne. She stood beside a long oak table. On it lay the torn purple gown, the crystal shoes, the cobbler's wax tablet, Walker's ledgers, wage rolls, tax orders, and written testimonies sealed by witnesses. The old satin had darkened with time. Then the silver lilies still showed where Carlos's hand had ripped them apart. The first charges concerned the realm: illegal levies, stolen military pay, false grain seizures, private enrichment through royal office. Captains testified, farmers testified, clerks testified with ink still under their nails. Walker blamed his daughter, then his sons, then the dead king. The ledgers answered with dates. The second charges concerned the bond. Mara, the palace cook, spoke first. She described the servant room, the hidden meals, the burns on Ella's hands, and the night Ella overheard Carlos laughing. Maud, the matron, tried to deny orders until 3 younger maids contradicted her. Ella asked that the maids not be punished for silence under threat. The hall stirred at that. Mercy, when exact, can be more unsettling than rage. The cobbler confessed next. Isabella had ordered shoes 1 size too small and paid extra for roughened inner heels. He had kept the wax tablet because Walker accounts were often disputed. He cried while speaking. Isabella called him a liar until the tablet was shown to bear her seal. The tailor admitted the gown had been cut wrong on purpose. He owed Walker money. Isabella had promised the debt forgiven if Ella looked foolish before the altar. Carlos stared at the table then, not at Ella. At last, Ella lifted the gown. "I guarded this for 2 nights," she said. "Then, I believed the moon was blessing it. I believed obedience would protect me from accusation. I believed a fated mate would not choose applause over mercy." No one laughed. Isabella planned the gown and shoes because she feared losing rank. Lord Walker supported her because my humiliation kept his family near the crown. Carlos accepted the lie because it gave him permission to reject a bond he found inconvenient. Their motives were not mysterious. That is why they are dangerous. Ordinary greed can do extraordinary harm when a court rewards it. Carlos finally spoke. "Ella, I was misled." She looked at him for a long moment. The silver mark at her neck did not burn. It did not even warm. "You held the gown in your own hand," she said. "Then you heard me beg 1 sentence of truth. You tore it anyway." "I was king." That made the wound larger, not smaller. Isabella sank to her knees before anyone ordered it. "I was afraid," she said. "You do not know what it is to be raised for one place and see it given to someone else." "I know what it is to have my place stolen," Ella answered. "Fear explains why you reached for cruelty. It does not excuse the hand." The sentences were read before sunset. Carlos was stripped of the crown and confined for life in the North Tower. He would be fed, guarded, and made to sign restitution orders until every lawful debt his reign created had been counted. He would never again command a soldier, judge a servant, or enter the altar square. Isabella was sentenced to 3 years of labor on the border mine road. She would work barefoot under healer supervision, not to be maimed, but to remember that another woman's pain had once amused her. Her jewels were sold for wage restitution. Her name was removed from court rank. Lord Walker and his sons received separate trials for theft, bribery, and military fraud. Their estates were seized where crimes were proven. Tenant lands taken by false debt were returned. Soldiers received back pay from the Walker vaults before any noble fine was counted. When guards led Carlos away, he twisted once toward Ella. "We were fated," he said. "No," Ella replied. "We were tested." The words followed him out. That afternoon, the altar square was washed. Ella ordered the old blood marks left visible until sunset, so no one could pretend the stone had always been clean. Then servants laid fresh rushes, priests refilled the moon basin, and the tailor of Frosthall brought a new purple gown. This gown fit because it had been measured 3 times and altered twice. Purple satin rested smoothly at Ella's shoulders. Silver lilies opened across the hem without dragging. She wore soft lambskin boots lined with fur at the heels. Leon knelt before her to test the fit. "Too tight?" he asked. Ella looked down at the man who had never asked her to be smaller so he could feel tall. Her throat tightened. "Just right." They climbed the altar together. Carlos was brought under guard to witness the ceremony from the lower square. He looked thinner already, as if power had been a cloak someone had taken back. Isabella was on the mine road by then, walking behind a cart that carried her jeweled shoes where she could see them and not wear them. Leon bit the silver mark before the moon basin. Light rose through Ella's body, not violent and not consuming, but steady as dawn over snow. The wolves beside the altar lifted their heads and howled. The crowd answered, not with cruel laughter, but with a sound large enough to shake banners loose from rainwater. Ella looked once at Carlos. His mouth formed an apology. It arrived 3 years late and empty of repair. She let it pass without entering her. After the vows, she walked down the steps without pain. Halfway across the square, she stopped and removed her boots. Warm stone met healed skin. The crowd quieted, unsure what the gesture meant. Ella smiled. "I wanted to know," she told Leon. "And?" "The ground is only ground now." They rode north before evening. Behind them, the capital began the harder work of changing ledgers, offices, laws, and habits. Ahead, snow waited beyond the passes. Ella leaned against Leon's chest, the purple gown covered by a travel cloak, the torn scraps packed safely in a cedar box. In later years, children learned the story from that box. They saw the ripped lilies and the dark stains. Teachers told them not that Ella had suffered beautifully, but that a kingdom nearly mistook cruelty for order. A sacred bond is not a license to harm, and a crown is not a shield against judgment. If someone needs your humiliation to prove their height, step away before their shadow becomes your prison. Carlos expected the North Tower to feel temporary. Men like him often mistake a closed door for a pause in applause. The first week he demanded wine, velvet bedding, his personal barber, and the right to send letters without inspection. Ella allowed a barber under guard, denied the wine, replaced velvet with clean wool, and ordered every letter copied before it left the room. His first letters went to nobles who had praised him loudest. Most did not answer. One sent a prayer book. Another sent a purse of silver and no signature, which told Carlos more than loyalty would have. A third wrote that his family had always respected lawful transition. Carlos tore that letter into pieces small enough to look like snow. The tower clerk swept them up. "Do not touch that," Carlos snapped. "It is refuse, my lord. I am still your king." The clerk looked at the bare table, the sealed window, the guard by the door, and the restitution papers waiting for signature. He did not smile. "No, my lord." That answer did what the trial had not. It entered Carlos without ceremony. He struck the table, then his chair, then nothing at all because the guard had put one hand on his sword. For the first time in his life, Carlos discovered that rage without power is merely noise. Every third day, petitions were read to him. Not all involved grand crimes. A widow needed coin returned from an unlawful hearth tax. A farrier had supplied shoes for cavalry horses and never been paid. 3 sisters sought title to a cottage walker's cousin had seized through a false debt. Carlos tried to ignore the small cases, but the clerk read them in a steady voice until smallness became accusation. "Why must I hear every broken hinge and missing goat?" Carlos asked. "Because each was easier to steal than a crown," the clerk answered. In the border mines, Isabella learned a different silence. The women guarding her did not flatter, pity, or hate her in the theatrical manner she understood. They woke her before dawn, checked her feet, assigned her basket weight, and recorded what she carried. If blisters opened, the healer cleaned them and sent her back to lighter work. No one let her die. No one let her perform suffering as innocence. At first, Isabella tried to rule the prison yard through habit. She offered a copper hair comb to one woman for extra bread. Then she promised future favor to a guard who had no interest in future courts. She told another prisoner that Ella was unstable and Leon bewitched. The prisoner, whose husband had lost both feet after Walker's supply fraud, spat near Isabella's skirt and went back to lifting stone. Pain made Isabella angry before it made her thoughtful. The mine road cut her soles even under supervision. Her shoulders ached. Her hands blistered, healed, and hardened. On the 12th day, she saw her reflection in a water trough and slapped the surface until the image broke. Rouge could no longer build the face she had used as armor. The first person she apologized to was not Ella. It was a laundress named May, sentenced for stealing soap after Walker taxes took her wages. May listened without looking impressed. "Are you sorry because you understand?" May asked, "or because your feet hurt?" Isabella opened her mouth. No elegant answer came. "Start there," May said. That night, Isabella lay on her pallet and remembered the servant room door opening under her hand. She remembered kicking Ella's wounded leg. At the time, the act had felt small compared with the triumph of keeping Carlos. In memory, it would not shrink. It remained exactly the size of her character. Ella received monthly reports from both tower and mines. She read them in council, not in bed. Private satisfaction can rot if fed too richly. Leon understood that instinctively. He never asked whether Carlos suffered enough. He asked whether the orders were lawful, whether the guards were watched, and whether restitution moved faster than resentment. One report from the tower said Carlos had signed 47 repayments and refused 12. Ella sent the 12 back with witness copies. Another report said Isabella had completed 2 months without punishment but had tried to bribe a guard with a hidden ruby. Ella ordered the ruby sold for mine boots and added 6 weeks to Isabella's term. The sentence had rules. The rules had teeth. Rumors tried to turn Ella into a hungry avenger anyway. Ballad sellers near the West Bridge sang that she drank wine from Carlos's crown and made Isabella crawl on broken glass. Ella summoned 3 of them, paid for the songs, and crossed out the lies in front of a magistrate. "Truth is dramatic enough," she said. The revised song sold worse at first. Then mothers began buying it for daughters. Soldiers bought it for barracks. Servants bought it because the names of witnesses remained in the verses. After 1 season, the truer song outlasted the bloody one, which surprised poets and no one who had ever scrubbed a floor under threat. Repair did not move like conquest. It had no banners and few cheers. It arrived as inventories, hearings, reopened granaries, and long arguments over bridges. Ella learned that some nobles could face battle more bravely than bookkeeping. Numbers exposed theft without giving anyone a heroic pose. The first reform changed servant law. No bonded servant could be punished in a private chamber without a recorded charge and a second witness from outside the household. Nobles called it an insult to ancient trust. Mara the cook attended the hearing in her best brown dress and asked which ancient trust required locked doors and hidden bruises. The law passed before supper. The second reform concerned mate bonds. Priests had long treated faded marks as divine instructions but rarely discussed abuse inside those bonds. Ella required every bonding ceremony to include a public oath of bodily dignity, property rights, and lawful separation under cruelty. 3 old priests objected that sacred unions should not be clouded by talk of failure. Ella placed the torn gown on the council table and waited. The objection died there. The third reform returned land taken through Walker debt courts. This proved hardest. Paper trails twisted through cousins, marriages, bribes, and false witnesses. Some tenants had died. Then some heirs had scattered. Some farms had been sold twice and planted by families who had not known the first theft. Ella refused simple answers because simple answers would create new victims. Each district received a mixed panel of guild, pack, church, and crown judges. Their work was slow. It was also the first time many poor claimants had seen a noble wait while they spoke. Leon took charge of road security during those months. He rode often, sometimes gone for weeks. Court gossips wondered whether the royal pair had cooled. Ella found that funny in a tired way. A love that cannot survive useful absence is only hunger wearing perfume. Leon returned from each patrol with mud on his boots, accurate maps, and one small thing for her desk. A pine cone from Frosthall, then a river stone from Hymir, a child's carved wolf from Milburn. Ella kept those objects beside petitions. They reminded her that the realm was not a theory. It was weather, roads, hands, and names. One evening, Ruth came before the council. The scullery girl had grown taller and less afraid, though she still twisted her apron when nobles looked at her. Ella had offered her a place in the palace records office. Ruth wanted to accept, but feared the servant wing would hate her for rising. "Some will," Ella said. "Not because you did wrong, because your courage will remind them where they were silent." "Then should I refuse?" "No, but do not despise them too quickly. Fear can make people smaller than they are." Ruth took the post. Within a year, she had the neatest hand in Valemont and the sharpest memory for missing seals. She caught 2 bribery attempts before either reached a judge. When thanked, she said pickle barrels were better teachers than court tutors because they taught a person what powerful people overlooked. Penn the tailor also returned, carrying a box of needles as if it were a weapon. He asked permission to make gowns for orphaned girls who married without family. Ella granted the request and paid him from her personal purse, not crown funds. Forgiveness was not declared. It was worked toward stitch by stitch under the eyes of those he had harmed. Seth the cobbler made the first anniversary boots. He came to Frosthall trembling, certain Leon would reject him. Instead, Ella asked whether he could build a heel that would not rub during a long ride. "Yes, my lady." "Then do that, and never again let fear make your craft a knife." He bowed so low his forehead touched the floor. The boots lasted 4 winters. Not every ending softened. Maud the matron lost her office and spent 1 year cleaning the public infirmary she had once mocked. Walker's eldest son died of fever before his trial ended, leaving debts and no legend. 2 judges fled and were caught at the coast. Carlos's closest drinking companions invented sudden illnesses whenever court attendance required them to hear restitution cases. Ella did not chase every coward for pleasure. She chose the cases that protected the future. That restraint frustrated people who wanted spectacle, but it steadied those who needed law. On the 2nd anniversary of the torn gown, Ella visited the altar square alone before dawn. Rain had washed the stones dark. She stood where Carlos had stripped the satin from her shoulders. Memory came, but not as command. It passed through her like cold air through an open gate. Mara found her there again, older, and wrapped in a kitchen shawl. "You always come too early," Mara said. "You always follow. Someone must make sure queens eat." Ella smiled. They sat on the lowest step with a basket of cheese rolls between them. Servants crossed the square on morning errands and did not pretend not to see. That was another change. In the old palace, pain hid. In the new one, even quiet companionship could sit in public. When the sun rose, the stones showed no blood. Ella did not need them to. Proof had done its work. Memory had moved from wound to warning. The last reform of that first year was the quietest, and Ella guarded it most fiercely. Witnesses who had spoken against nobles needed more than applause. Applause faded before a kitchen girl walked home after dark or a cobbler reopened his shop beneath a lord's window. Ella created a witness purse funded from seized Walker coin. It paid for new locks, travel papers, apprenticeships, and winter fuel. Some counselors called the purse sentimental. Ella invited Ruth to read the first list of protected names aloud. A groom who had hidden wage rolls, then a laundress who had carried messages in soap wrappers, a shrine boy who had copied burial records, a tailor who had confessed under oath, though confession ruined his trade for a season. By the end of the list, nobody used the word sentimental again. The purse passed with only 2 abstentions, both recorded carefully. Leon proposed another measure after the vote. Every royal household order involving punishment would bear 2 signatures, one from the noble house and one from the crown's servant advocate. The advocate would be elected by the palace staff every winter. Maud's old keys were melted into the first seal handle. Mara the cook held it during the ceremony, looking deeply uncomfortable in front of cheering servants. "I am a cook," she said. "You fed the truth before anyone else dared serve it," Ella answered. Mara snorted, but she kept the seal. The renewed palace felt strange for months. Doors stayed open too often because people were afraid of what closing them might mean. Servants spoke carefully, then less carefully, then with the ordinary irritation of people who expected to be heard. Nobles complained about insolence. Ella answered that respect obtained through terror had always been counterfeit. Her own private life changed with equal slowness. Leon moved into the royal apartments only after Ella asked him. Even then, he kept a separate room connected by a small library, because nightmares did not vanish, simply because justice had been done. Some nights, Ella woke with the altar in her mouth. She would find the library lamp burning low and Leon asleep in a chair, close enough to call, far enough to leave her untrapped. One storm night, she woke shaking and angry at herself for shaking. Leon did not touch her until she held out one hand. "It has been years," she said. "The body counts differently." "I hate that." "I know." She laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the answer had no ornament. He had learned that some pain did not need poetry. It needed patience, water, warm blankets, and a person who did not demand gratitude for staying. On the third anniversary, Ella chose to hold court in the altar square instead of the hall. Petitioners stood where nobles had once laughed. The moon basin remained nearby, filled with clear water. A young woman from a mill town brought a complaint against her own alpha, who had used a mate mark to seize her wages. The crowd stiffened, sensing the old story under the new case. Ella did not speak first. She let the woman speak. Then she let the accused answer. Witnesses were called, accounts examined, and the mark priest questioned. The alpha lost his claim before sunset. The woman kept her wages and received guarded passage to her sister's pack. Afterward, the woman knelt in thanks. Ella stepped down and raised her by both hands. "Do not kneel for being believed," Ella said. That sentence traveled farther than the judgment. It reached villages where women hid bruises beneath sleeves and boys believed strength meant ownership. Then it reached priests who had blessed cruel bonds because tradition was easier than confrontation. It reached young alphas before pride hardened into law. Years later, people would argue about Ella's reign as people argue about any ruler. Some said she was too severe with nobles. Others said she trusted records more than blood. A few still whispered that Carlos had been bewitched. Those whispers never found much soil. Too many ledgers had been opened. Too many witnesses had been paid, protected, and named. Ella accepted imperfection more easily than flattery. She knew a clean legend could become another trap. So she allowed the rougher truth to stand. She had been naive. Then she had been humiliated. She had wanted love from the wrong man. She had also walked away, healed, learned command, chosen better love, and returned with enough discipline to keep vengeance from becoming law. That was the story she wanted preserved. In the 5th year, a delegation from Valemont asked Ella to remove the torn gown from the council chamber because foreign envoys stared at it before trade meetings. The request came wrapped in respectful language about dignity, renewal, and the need to present a confident realm. Ella heard the old fear beneath the polished phrases. Some people wanted healing to mean a clean wall where evidence had once hung. She called the envoys, guild heads, priests, and servant advocate into the chamber at noon. The gown remained behind glass, faded now, with one sleeve torn past the silver lilies. Beside it stood the child's shoes from the southern road, Seth's wax tablet, and a copied page from the unpaid wage roll. None were beautiful. All were necessary. "Confidence is not pretending we were never cruel," Ella said. "Confidence is proving we learned enough to stop hiding it." The merchant who had written the request bowed with a red face. He admitted that buyers from the eastern duchies had asked hard questions after seeing the display. Ella asked whether the questions had ended the trade. They had not. In fact, the duchies had offered better terms once they understood Walker's fraud had been prosecuted rather than buried. Shame, handled honestly, had become evidence of stability. After the meeting, Leon found Ella alone near the glass. She was not crying. She was studying the old seam where Carlos's hand had torn downward. The room smelled of beeswax, parchment, and rain from an open window. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. "Sometimes." "Today?" "No. Today it reminds me that the worst thing they did was not the tearing, it was teaching everyone else to watch. Leon stood beside her for a long while before answering. Then we keep teaching them to move. That became the final sentence added to the school copy of the story. When cruelty commands a crowd, the first duty is not to enjoy the safety of being unnoticed. The first duty is to move, speak, witness, or open a gate when the hour comes. The first winter of Ella's rule tested the lesson harder than the ceremony had. Grain stores were low. Walker's cousins still held clerkships in 3 districts. Southern nobles who had bowed in the hall sent polite letters asking whether old privileges might be restored for stability. Ella read each letter twice, then asked whose stability they meant. She did not rule by softness. A tax collector who hid coin under his sister's floor lost his office and faced trial. Then a northern captain who struck a prisoner was stripped of command. A priest who had lied for Walker kept his life but lost his seat at judgment. Mercy remained possible. Impunity did not. Carlos signed restitution orders in the tower until his hand cramped. At first he raged and broke quills. Later he grew quiet. The clerk assigned to him was the son of a mason who had died unpaid on a royal wall. The young man never insulted Carlos. He simply read every debt aloud. Shame worked slowly when no audience could be blamed for it. Isabella changed more visibly and less completely. Mind labor took the softness from her palms and the certainty from her voice. She learned the weight of water buckets, the cruelty of bad shoes, and the anger of women whose brothers had vanished into Walker contracts. Some evenings she cried from pain. Other evenings she cried because no one cared that she cried. That was a different education. Ella visited the mine road once at midsummer. Isabella saw her from the stone line and went rigid. The guards waited for a command. Ella gave none. She checked the food stores, the healer's notes, the work hours, and the wage ledger held for prisoners after release. She should suffer more, one guard muttered. Ella closed the ledger. She should suffer what the law named. More than that would belong to my anger, not justice. The guard flushed and bowed. On the anniversary of the first altar, Leon brought Ella a pair of boots before dawn. They were dark green, plain, and lined at the heel with 3 layers of soft fur. He looked almost embarrassed when he handed them over. "Too much?" he asked. Ella ran her thumb along the heel. "No. I can have them changed." "Leon." He stopped. "They are perfect." The habit remained. Every year, a new pair of boots waited near the hearth. Some were riding boots, some were soft house boots. One pair was made for snowfields, with silver stitching hidden inside the cuff where only Ella could see it. The court made songs about the gifts. Ella ignored most of them. The boots mattered because love had become specific. It remembered where she had hurt and chose care without demanding applause. Years later, when the realm was steadier, Ella returned to Brackenford with Leon and their council guard. Elder Bram had grown thin and stooped, but he still stood at the village gate with both hands on his staff. Ella embraced him before anyone bowed. "I sent you away believing fate would be enough," he said. "So did I." "We were wrong." Ella looked toward the sheep lanes, the low roofs, the children peeking from doorways. "Fate can open a road. It cannot walk it for us, and it cannot make a cruel heart kind." That sentence entered Brackenford's winter sayings. It was carved later above the village hall, not beside Ella's name, but beside the moon symbol all border packs shared. The torn gown stayed in Valemont's council chamber behind clear glass, not as a shrine to suffering. Ella hated that idea. It remained as a record. When disputes arose over rank, bond, duty, or punishment, the clerks sometimes glanced toward the purple scraps before speaking. Cloth had become law's memory. No one in Valemont forgot the day a king tore his own throne while tearing a woman's gown. No one in Frosthall forgot the day a wounded Omega arrived with bleeding feet and still chose to live. Between those memories, Ella built a rule plain enough for children and hard enough for nobles. Power is proved by whom it protects when nobody is cheering. Love is proved by what it refuses to use against the beloved. Justice is proved by whether it can stand after anger cools. So the purple gown remained where every new official could see it, not to keep Ella trapped in old pain, but to remind the realm that hidden cruelty grows bold when honorable people choose comfort over witness.